A car is a man's best friend, but that car can also be a genuine nightmare. Trust me, this horrible experience will prove this. I was looking for a car to buy for my son for his 18th birthday. I was searching for all the regular car websites like cars.com or eBay Motors. They were all overpriced as expected. Craigslist was the only place to find an actual deal. I found an '03 Toyota Camry about a week ago. It had 70,000 miles, no accidents, no damage, and in good condition for only $3,500. I thought it must be a stolen one for such a reliable car at this cheap price and with such low mileage. The seller lived about 10 miles from me, which was a fair drive. When looking for a car, I gave him a call to set up one a time to come check it out. The man sounded quite regular on the phone. He assured me that there were absolutely no problems with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I brought along $3,500 in cash, even though I planned on wiggling down the price as much as possible. I pulled up the dirt road to Bob's property about 15 minutes early. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, only because it was a bit far from the nearest neighbors. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anybody was inside. It was a nice ambience all around. But the problem was, except for an unusual amount of car parts, it was all empty. The car I was looking for was nowhere in sight. The only car on the property was an old pickup truck. I went over to the front door to check the house numbers. It was the right address, but the doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the front door. I knocked for exactly 5 minutes before deciding to give the man a call. I dialed his number and I heard the sound of a cell phone ringing from inside the house. I was extremely confused at this point, thinking what the hell was going on. Now I knew I had the right house, but I didn't understand why if he was at home, then he wasn't answering. I decided I had to take a peek through one of the windows to see if anybody was inside. I knew I had become a peeping Tom, but I had no other choice. But peeping through the glass, I couldn't really see much as it was pretty dark inside. Then I saw a very old-fashioned dining room set, but across from that, I saw somebody standing at the back door, staring outside. I figured that must have been Bob, so I knocked on the window, but he didn't even move. There was no gate or anything in the backyard. It was just a wide-open yard since this wasn't a rural area. I simply walked around the house to the backyard. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me. When I got to the back door, I made a shocking realization. The figure standing by the door was a taxidermied human being. It seemed like a scene straight from the Hitchcock movie. I ran straight back the way I came and back to my car. I looked up one last time before driving off the blinds to the window I had peeked into, but it was shut. Still, I could see 2 of the blinds bent open. Somebody was at that window watching me. You can probably guess I had the gas pedal to the floor. The whole way home I was thinking about this bizarre experience. The series of events still makes no sense. The very fact that there was no Toyota Camry and that weird taxidermied human being was the scariest shit I ever saw in my life. There was no car there leads me to believe that whoever that man was wasn't planning on selling me anything. That also leads to the disturbing thought that I was very close to becoming a lifeless statue. So no more cheap deal, saving money for a brand new Cadillac. Story 2. Could you believe a simple phone deal can make your life hell? Let me tell you the trauma I faced just a few days ago. I was looking to buy the iPhone 14 about a year ago. I found a guy on Craigslist who was selling this for $400. He claimed it was in cool condition and that he wanted to upgrade to the 15 Pro Max. I didn't know much about how to go about testing a phone to make sure everything works well. So I brought my little brother along, who knew a lot more than I did. After all, he's a Gen Z. We met halfway at the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot at like 10 o'clock at night. 2 large intimidating guys stepped out of a black Honda Civic and walked over to us. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting such WWF figures at all. One of the guys pulled out the phone and showed it to me. It didn't have a scratch on it. My brother took out my SIM card and popped it into his new phone. He did some testing and told me that it worked. The big guy then asked for $450. I was shocked as he originally asked for $400, but I was a little scared. So I lied and told him I only brought 400, and he seemed a bit unhappy with this. I did have 450, but I didn't want to spend more than his original asking price. I still believe it was a fair deal. I kind of figured it was his way of making sure I didn't haggle down the price. I handed 400 to the guy, and he and his buddy got back in their car. We got back into my car and I tested out the new phone by calling my girlfriend. I sat testing things around for about 5 minutes. Then my brother commented on the fact that the two guys hadn't left yet either, but I didn't really care as the deal was done. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. My brother then commented that the two guys started their car just as I had. I didn't find it too weird. I drove down the turnpike and eventually stopped at a red light. That's when I noticed the black Honda Civic pull up right behind us in my rearview mirror. I found that a bit weird since I was sure they came from the opposite direction. I continued my drive home, but with every single turn we made, they followed and closed on my tail too. My brother suggested I pull over, but there was no way I was going to do that. I knew those guys were looking for trouble. It got to the point where I was trying to lose them and started driving dangerously. I thought if they needed something, they would call or at least honk their horn, but they were looking for some kind of trouble. I tried something risky to lose them at an intersection. The light had just turned red. I floated across the intersection before any of the cars would begin to pass. My brother shouted at me, calling me crazy, but it worked. They didn't follow. We got home after the extra long drive, and my heart was still racing from the intensity of the situation. I was just happy that I got a working phone for such a low cost. It's not every day you get an iPhone 14 at 400. Later that night, I was playing around with the phone trying to set some things up before going to bed. My parents and brother were already asleep. At this point, the sound of 2 car doors slamming shut outside interrupted me. I looked out my window and felt like my heart completely stopped. To my utter surprise, the black Honda Civic was parked across the street. I could only assume the 2 guys were already halfway to our front door. I immediately woke up my dad and explained everything as quickly as possible. He got up, grabbed a baseball bat, and crouched behind the front door. A loud knock came at the front door. My dad screamed at them to go away. One of the guys on the other side of the door claimed to have a gun and said that he would shoot if the lock of the door didn't open up. My dad told me to call Joe, our friend who lives 2 doors down. Joe happens to be a police officer. I called Joe and he said he would be right over. He told us to stay hidden. There was absolute tension all over. Now here's the part that still scares me to this day. It was nerve-chilling, to say the least. There was the sound of a silenced shot of a pistol. I peeked over and saw a bullet hole in the door inches away from my dad's head. My dad ran away from the door. We all heard Joe outside yelling at them to drop their weapons. My dad also went outside to help when they lowered their guns. Joe arrested the 2 scoundrels. I have to say, this was the scariest day of my life, but it was also the best I had ever felt in my entire life. Yes, we're all scared, but we stood for each other when it was needed. One for all and all for one. That's what a family is. Story 3. My personal horror story was about a couch. And I'm not any kind of a psycho who's at a doctor's chamber. I'm just a 21-year-old girl. I was looking on Craigslist to buy a couch for my new apartment a month ago, and that changed my life. Now let me tell you the fretful story. I found something I thought seemed like a cool deal. The couch seemed to be in great shape from the pictures. The seller wanted to be contacted by email, and his email was mexicanpoppy666@gmail.com. Quite a weird one, I must say. Even though I felt like that mail was a bit bizarre, I still went ahead and emailed the chap my offer. He responded within 5 minutes of accepting the offer and asking for my address. I honestly felt uncomfortable with this sudden query. I did not want an absolute stranger coming to my house. I suggested that I just come to his house to pick it up from there, but he repeatedly insisted that he come to my house. Finally, I stopped responding, and a day later, he emailed me again, giving me his address. Well, that's a ton of events. I didn't know if I should go at the point. but it seemed like a deal almost too good to be true, and most importantly, his address wasn't too far. I got in my van and drove over to the seller's house. I immediately noticed that the house was a bit smaller than all the other houses on the block. Maybe the guy isn't that well off like the others in the neighborhood. When I rang the bell, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap answered the door. He gave me a huge smile. He invited me in, and I was instantly feeling awkward. He led me into his living room and I saw the couch. Just at the first look, I saw scuff marks and small tears on the couch. Of course, it was not all in the shape that it appeared in the ad. I commented on this with a firm voice. The guy just smiled and offered to lower the price. I told him I was not at all interested. From that very moment, things started getting really creepy. As I was making my way out of the house, he put his hand on my shoulder and offered to give it to me for free. Now that's really unusual for a stranger. I was certain he was about to make an indecent proposal. I was disgusted as hell and got back into my car. I didn't even look up out the window. I just drove away from there fast. But sadly, this forgettable experience didn't end there. That same night, I was lying in my bed watching TV when I thought I heard somebody stomping up the steps of my Porsche. I muted the TV and was able to clearly hear the sound of somebody fiddling with my front doorknob. I was genuinely scared. I jumped out of my bed and tipped out over to the front door to look through the peephole. But whoever it was already gone, and then I thought I could hear the sound of the gate to the backyard opening and closing. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Soon after, I heard the sound of somebody fiddling with the doorknob to the back door of the apartment. I yelled to whoever it was that the police were on their way. After that, I heard the sound of the gate opening and closing again, and they were gone. I took a big sigh of relief. This was a month ago and nothing has happened since, but I still can't sleep at night. I'm 99% sure it was that creepy guy who was selling the couch. He must have followed me home. There's no way it was just a mere coincidence. I don't plan on using Craigslist anymore, and I'm still trying to find a new apartment. And trust me, there'll be no couch there.